Please make Gasho. May the sacred presence of the one who said he would abide in his teachings be our guide. May we follow his glorious example and tread with unfaltering steps this noble path, until we too shall attain enlightenment. All Buddhas throughout space and time, all honored ones, Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, wisdom beyond wisdom, Maha Prajna Paramita. Good evening. It's good to see you all. Tonight I want to talk about Bodhisattvas in motion. And part of this is coming from a chaplain in the hospital had asked, what's a good Dogen fascicle to read to do this sort of work? What's a good thing to study while I'm doing this training? So he's doing his clinical pastoral education residency, which is what I did last year, and sort of in this mix of learning how to support patients spiritually, wherever they are, whatever faith tradition they are. And he's also learning a lot about himself. So part of this program is a lot of sort of doing some internal work in terms of understanding relationship to authority, how you hold power, what karmic triggers there are. Of course, they don't use those word karmic triggers, but what I would call karmic triggers, being able to articulate his own personal theology. So it's a lot of internal work. It's a lot of external work. And so in thinking of that, I offered him the Bodhisattva's four methods on guidance, which talks about 4 ways Bodhisattvas can show up in the world. Giving kind speech. There's 2 more. There goes me and my lists. Giving kind speech, beneficial action, and identity action. And in a way, these are 4 great things to think about when taking a practice up off a cushion and into the world. Giving can be done whether you're on the cushion or off the cushion. It's just this embodiment of generosity. Kind speech is important. Being gentle with oneself, the speech we use internally and externally. Beneficial action almost is self-explanatory in terms of what it is we're aiming for. To be of benefit to ourselves, to others, in this present moment. Identity action, embodying something wholeheartedly, fully. So I brought this fascicle to him, and I don't know what happened after that, because I ended up resigning from my position, partially, well, mostly 100%, just to take care of my own health. This is not the point of my talk, is to talk about my health, but taking care of my energy, taking care of my capacity. I still have, I still have the effects of having had COVID before I had a vaccine, before a vaccine was available to me. And it has impacted me, and it continues to impact me. So I had given this chaplain resident this fascicle and then stepped away. I don't know what happened. I only hope that this fascicle benefited him. And so in preparing for this talk, I was thinking about this a lot. I was like, oh, this is the fascicle that this is like, yes. But as I read it again, I thought, for our Sangha, for this Sangha, for this talk, we can go a little bit deeper. That I know I've talked about that fascicle before, and I know it's good to have these reminders of giving kind speech, beneficial action, and identity action. But what I wanted to bring forward in terms of Bodhisattvas in motion, how do we take up our practice in daily life? How do we lean into it if we've been practicing for a while? And we've heard the Dharma talks and we've read the books, and we have a sense of what all of this is. Like, how do we like touch it a little deeper, lean into it a little more, feel it in our body a little more, make it a little more vibrant? So what I want to bring forward today is a little bit, not the whole fascicle, but a little bit from Sensuikyo, the Mountains and Waters Sutra. This is a fascicle by Dogen. And I always think of Sado when this fascicle comes up. I don't know if any of you know Sado Martin. She's a lay teacher down at Empty Field Zendo and Zen West in Eugene, Oregon. And she's a student of Kyogen's, a lay teacher. And she has a large organic farm and has built a beautiful rustic zendo on her farm with her community. And I heard her teach once on this fascicle, and so it always makes me think of Sado. There's something green about it, something outside, something mystifying. Not mystifying as in confusing, but mystifying as in it's not an easy fascicle to walk through. It's not an easy fascicle to just read page after page like a novel. There's a part of this that in a way is Dogen being the most Dogen. And I'll read a little bit from the beginning, just so you get a flavor of it. Mountains and waters right now are the actualization of the ancient Buddha way. Each abiding in its phenomenal expression realizes completeness. Because mountains and waters have been active since before the empty eon, they are alive at this moment. Because they have been the self since before form arose, they are emancipation realization. Because mountains are high and broad, the way of riding the clouds is always reached in the mountains. The inconceivable power of soaring in the wind comes freely from the mountains. Priest Dokai of Mount Furong said to the assembly, "The green mountains are always walking. The stone woman gives birth to a child at night." Mountains do not lack the qualities of mountains. Therefore, they always abide in ease and always walk. You should examine in detail this quality of the mountains walking. Mountain walking is just like human walking. Accordingly, do not doubt the mountains walking, even though it does not look the same as human walking. The Buddha ancestors' words point to walking. This is fundamental understanding. You should penetrate these words. Because green mountains walk, they are permanent. Although they walk more swiftly than the wind, someone in the mountains does not realize or understand it. In the mountains means blossoming of the entire world. People outside the mountains do not realize or understand the mountains walking. Those without eyes to see mountains cannot realize, understand, see, or hear this as it is. If you doubt mountains walking, you do not know your own walking. It is not that you do not walk, but that you do not know or understand your own walking. Since you do know your own walking, you should fully know the Green Mountains walking. Green Mountains are neither sentient nor insentient. You are neither sentient nor insentient. At this moment, you cannot doubt the Green Mountains walking. And it continues on through there. It's beautiful, it's poetic, it's full of imagery. And I have it in my head to perhaps study this in more detail with you all later on in the year, if that's something you're interested in. But part of what this fascicle speaks to, it plays with form and emptiness. It plays with the inner penetration of form and emptiness. And it plays with the non-opposition of not only form and emptiness, form and form as well. And this last part that I read, if you doubt the mountains walking, you do not know your own walking. It is not that you do not walk, but that you do not know or understand your own walking. Since you do know your own walking, you should fully know the Green Mountains walking. Do you know your own walking? Do you know how you show up in the world? Do you know how you move through space? Do you know how you make a self or let a self dissolve? There's an intimacy here that Dogen points us towards. And that is what caught my attention, bringing forward this idea of Bodhisattvas in motion. That it's not, or at least in the way I'm thinking about it right now, because there's many ways to actualize this. There's one way of actualizing Bodhisattva practice that goes out and up. There's one way of actualizing Bodhisattva practice, embodying practice, that comes in and close. And this is the one I'm talking about today. That there's an aspect of practice of embodying bodhisattva-ness, bodhisattvahood, bodhisattva qualities, where the motion is inward, the motion is softening, the motion is becoming. But that which we become comes from seeing into and seeing through who we were before or what we were before. This takes vulnerability. This takes a willingness to see clearly. This requires trust that we're willing to meet what arises from our own minds, even if we don't like it. I think for some of us at least, having gained our footing in Zen practice, becoming familiar with what comes up in Zazen, we learn little tricks of how to avoid the things that are unpleasant. And yes, there are common complaints. Oh, my knees hurt, or I don't like getting up early in the morning, or my back hurts, or the person next to me grinds his teeth and it drives me bonkers. But there are also things that we learn. We learn to hide from ourselves in a particular way. We learn that when unpleasant thoughts arise, perhaps we listen to the birds instead. That's a good coping mechanism, but it doesn't get at the root of why the unpleasant thoughts arise or what it is we're trying to tell ourselves by having those unpleasant thoughts come up. So at some point, when we're ready, we lean into that and let it become a question. Oh, this thing keeps coming up. Why is that? Now notice labeling it and letting it be a question. Why is that? It's very different than getting caught up in the story of it. If what comes up is judgment about someone you don't like who's sitting in the hall with you, instead of getting wrapped up in a narrative about why they're wrong, oh, I'm judging that person again. Why is that? What's going on there? There's something very honest about that. You're not saying, I'm judging that person, I shouldn't. We have a precept about praise and blame. Therefore, they listen to the birds. This thing is coming up. I'm judging that person again. What's going on? If we can be curious about that and lean into that, we might see something we hadn't seen before. Or we might experience something we hadn't experienced before. And once again, it takes courage because it might not be pleasant. Oh, perhaps instead of an insight or a thought, there's a sense of tenderness or woundedness. And that woundedness then needs to be cared for. And the attention goes to the woundedness, not this other thing that's outside. What is here that is afraid? What is here that is hurt? What is here that needs comforting? And can we do that for ourselves? Can we do that by sharing that with someone we trust? Whether it's a partner, or a teacher, or a therapist. I thought I was mad at so-and-so, but really I'm hurt because such and such. What happens then when we get to know ourselves in this way? What happens then when we learn that we have thoughts and feelings that we hadn't let ourselves see before? What happens to our sense of identity? What happens to our sense of how we talk to ourselves? What happens when we let go of fixed views about who I am or who another person is? Part of what Dogen teaches in this Mountains and Waters Sutra is he doesn't let us get by with holding fixed views. He doesn't let us get by coasting on assumptions about the world we encounter. What is it to be a green mountain walking? What is it to be the waters flowing? He goes through all of these permutations of how waters flow. He goes through all these permutations of what green mountains are. And he never lets us settle down into any particular idea, any particular view. Always, Dogen's so good at always nudging us a little further, not there. Don't grab onto that idea. It's a thought. It's an experience. Here's this other one. Which one's right? They both are. Actually, here's a fourth. You didn't catch the third one, didn't you? Like, he just keeps going further and further. I'm very much enchanted by this idea of letting go of fixed views. I see this a lot. I engage with this idea a lot in the garden. I've been spending a lot of time in the temple gardens, and I meet so many creatures there. There are the crows and the small hawks and the wild bunnies who are racing around the garden today. There's 2 or 3 of them. The ladybugs and the spiders and a bazillion other little bugs. The little plants, that are growing, little seedlings. And as I work with these, as I encounter these, oftentimes I'll just stop, consider, what is life like for that little bunny? I can imagine that. Bunnies are cute. They have 2 ears. I have 2 ears. They have a little nose. I have a nose. They have relationships with other bunnies. I have relationships with people and bunnies. They're warm-blooded. I'm warm-blooded. I can imagine what it's like to be a small bunny scampering across the garden. It's a little harder, but still doable, to imagine being a little bug in the garden, perhaps a little ladybug. I can imagine it's harder. What it's like to have an exoskeleton. What it's like to trundle along with 6 legs and a hard red shell. Does a ladybug have a sense of I am? Does a bunny have a sense of I am? I'm guessing a bunny has some sense of self. They greet other bunnies. Ladybugs probably have, I don't know. When I get to the bug realm, it gets a little uncertain. It's harder yet imagining what it is to be a plant, what it is to be a little turnip starting to grow, soaking in the water, taking in the sunlight, growing so fast. But all of these are sentient beings. All of these are insentient beings. But all of these are beings. They respond to their environments. They change, they grow, they develop, just like we do. And while it's fun to take a perspective of a creature in the garden, we can also try to imagine what it is to be others we encounter. What is it like to be that person I see on the screen? What is it like to be that person I meet in the hospital? What is it like to be that person that I see on the side of the freeway? You know, Thich Nhat Hanh has that beautiful poem, Call Me by My True Name, where he goes on about all of these beings he is. And some of them are quite lovely and some of them are not. But we are all of these things. It's so easy to get wrapped up in fixed views. We do this socially, especially when we're talking politics with our, not even our best buddies, maybe our barely tolerated coworker, or our families. Talking politics with family members is very tricky at times. But we also have this fixed view of who we are. We have this fixed view of I am, or the world is, or it is like that. And Dogen nudges us. Don't hold on to that. Let it go. Let it go. Experience, experience, experience. What is this? And he encourages us to see deeply into what is. And to not get caught coasting on our assumptions. The garden bed looks very different when I look deeply. When I see it, just this slice of life, there's so much there. It's how, when I stop thinking I know, so much delight arises. When I engage curiosity, so much joy springs up. And that happens when I let go of my own sense of self as well, my own sense of I have to be like this, or people expect me to be like that. So as I'm speaking and as I'm bringing forward these little slivers of what Dogen says in this fascicle, part of me is like, yeah, we're going to come back to this one. We're going to come back to the Mountains and Waters Sutra. There's something very sweet in here. But I also want to hear from you all as well. See how this lands for you. There are a few head nods I saw as I was speaking. So with that, please feel free to comment or ask questions or say, Jyoshin, what in the world are you talking about?
There was a part that caught me a little that was about a stone woman giving birth at night.
Mm-hmm.
And I found it intriguing, but I don't think I understand it.
Mm-hmm. Good.
Okay.
Let me, there's what's the second chant that we chant on Sunday mornings at Dharma? The Precious Mirror Samadhi. Is it in there? It's in one of the two chants that we chant on Sunday morning.
Precious mirror.
Thank you. And I'm going to grab my notes here. Would you like a scholarly answer?
You know how I love scholarly answers.
So this is from a translation of the Mountains and Waters Sutra by Thomas Cleary. And this is in one of his footnotes because it addresses precisely that. And Cleary says, a stone woman means a barren woman, but the term is rendered literally here for the sake of subsequent metaphor, since it does not alter the meaning. A stone or barren woman bearing a child refers to conditions without inherent nature, producing interdependent origination. That is to say, phenomena, being conditional, have no absolute own being, are not existent as independent entities. As not existent, they are represented by the term barren woman, which cannot produce. Yet in terms of conditional relations, things do exist. This is the child. This is what is referred to by the Zen terms really empty, yet inconceivably existing. Night symbolizes emptiness, which is the identity of relative existence and absolute emptiness. The mountain's walking alludes to the continual flux of the phenomenal, which temporally exists, but not as something static and fixed. The saying of Dokai sums up the teaching of emptiness within existence and existence within emptiness. So that is a somewhat scholarly way of talking about this interpenetration of the absolute and the relative. It's not as if they're two separate things. Here's absolute, here's relative. But that they interpenetrate in a particular way. You know, the sutra here, or Buddhist philosophy really in general, talks a lot about causes and conditions and the relationship between causes and conditions. So a cause has an effect, but until an effect manifests, the cause is not a cause. So in that way things go in both directions. It's not linear in one direction. These relationships are multi-directional, if that makes any sense at all.
Definitely going to have to think on it. It reminds me of art and how with art you can create something that didn't really have any meaning for you, but if somebody else looks at it and has an intense emotional reaction to it, or vice versa, you can create something that for you is very meaningful, but for other people look at it and they're like, whatever. So yeah, it's sort of like yeah, and just the act of creating art. Oh, that's what came up for me with talking about that. But I still feel kind of like I'm trying to understand the whole relative and absolute. I still feel like I don't quite have a handle on that.
Okay, that's helpful to hear. I can do some more teaching on that. Maybe not tonight, but add that to the list of topics. As I was beginning to read sort of that Cleary's footnote there about that particular phrase, like it was so clear that this fascicle would be so great for Mondo. Just to pull out some of these phrases and see what can be brought forth from them, as opposed to saying this means that. And when Dogen says this, he's really talking like what comes alive, what is coming out of lived experience. This one is a particularly tricky fascicle of Dogen's to read, and I would say much of Dogen is difficult to read, and to say that this one is particularly tricky is saying something. I never liked it until about a year ago, and then I really liked it. So if you ever pick up reading some of Dogen's works and like, oh, I don't like it, it's okay. It's he plays with language a lot, and he plays with language a lot.
I found the mountains walking just the most brilliant way of talking about letting go of fixed views.
Mm. Mhm.
So thank you for that insight. Because when you read the quote from the fascicle, it honestly just sounded like gibberish. Mountains walking, it really did, But when you started talking about letting go of fixed views, it just made perfect sense, and I thought it was just brilliant.
Mhm.
I had some questions. I mean, in the beginning of your talk, you talked about giving, kind speech, beneficial action, and identity action. And I wondered if you could say just a little bit more about identity action.
Mm. Yeah. Let me go back to that fascicle. Identity action points to that sense of non-separation between self and other. Identity action being no difference. I can think of it as sort of the root of empathy.
Okay. Or the root of altruism.
Or the root of altruism. That sense of we're not separate. We may look separate, we may think of ourselves as separate, but we're not separate. In a fundamental way, we're not separate. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Or does that help at all?
It does,
I got to quit asking, does that make sense? Because some of this does not make sense to the intellectual mind.
No, that's helpful.
Okay.
I had another question, but I want to see if anybody else has anything to say.
Go for it, Dago.
So this comes up a lot about leaning into unpleasantness. So you touched on that, and this is a question that comes up for me all the time. When I lean into unpleasantness without the storyline, it's hard to do without continually feeding it with the story, so I can remember what the feelings associated with it are, because otherwise I end up just telling myself some words, anxiety, so when I drop the storyline, I'm really not sure how to generate this somatic experience without fueling it with the story.
Can you walk me through that process?
So I'm instructed to sit with something unpleasant, sit with something, that I would like to be, that I would like to go away from, or that would be an aversion. And it
I wouldn't
usually
start with that.
Okay.
Like, I wouldn't try to contrive something unpleasant to sit with.
No,
just to go through that process.
No, okay. that wouldn't be what I was doing. But my mind is full of unpleasantness. All I have to do is sit there for a few minutes, and it surfaces.
You're
So
sitting and unpleasantness arises.
I'm
What is the
sitting and
experience?
unpleasantness arises, and we're told to sit with it.
Mhm.
Also, I've been practicing Tonglen, and I'm supposed to breathe in the unpleasantness, and I get
Mhm.
that in my head. Makes a lot of sense. I really like it. But when
Mhm.
I go to actually practice that, it's hard to it's hard to no, to I can breathe in a lot of words, that are kind of negative, but to actually have this physical sensation, I'm not sure how to do that. I can't feel it without telling myself the story that gives rise to this. Maybe this is a Sanzen question.
Well, it's a it's a it's a somewhat maybe, but I'm going to answer it anyway.
Okay.
Tonglen is a great practice. It's a powerful practice. It lends itself towards that sense of identity action, of non-separation. When I have engaged it, I'm either working with a Tibetan teacher, or I'm using it as a way to address my own fears and anxieties. So, for example, I wake up in the middle of the night because I hear the sound of gunshots from somewhere in the neighborhood, and I feel that jolt of fear. And I go to practice, and I recognize that the fear is arising because there are these sounds. And I feel that fear, and I let myself feel that fear. And engaging Tonglen, I turn my mind towards taking in fear from others who are also experiencing these sounds. Maybe those are my neighbors. So I bring my neighbors to mind, and I breathe in the fear of my neighbors. I breathe in the fear of the people on the street. I breathe in the fear of the responders who might show up to any report of gunshots fired. And I take all of that fear and I breathe it in, 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 and I breathe it in. And I can press it internally and transform it into a white light that is then released. So I take in the fear and I breathe out this white light that's released. There's not a lot of storyline in there about, wow, there are gunshots and who's doing it. Did anybody call 911? And is anybody hurt? Should I go out and check on it? It's just really noticing the fear, the sensation, and noticing the connection to anybody else who might feel that sensation. It might be that when I worry about, gee, what if my cancer ever comes back? I think about all the other people who worry about whether their cancer is going to come back. And I'm willing to take their fear and transform it. And so that's a lot of what that practice has been for me. And it's not so much engaging the story to create the feelings, but it's when the feelings arise, really noticing those feelings and noticing how those feelings can be connection to others. Those aren't pleasant feelings. And I'm not trying to make them go away, but I'm actually trying to experience them fully. And that helped a lot when I was working in the hospital, when I could use my imagination to take what might it be like for these other people I'm meeting who are in their hospital beds, having had surgery, having had a limb amputated. because I can imagine there must be fear there, there must be anxiety there. I know what that feels like. So not trying to make it worse, but also not trying to push it away. Does that help at all? You look perplexed.
No, I'm not perplexed. I think it might be a Sanzang situation.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry about that, Tico.
No. It was lovely what you said, and that's certainly what I try to do, but I've run into obstacles.
Okay. Well, we'll talk about your obstacles.
Thank you.
Okay. It's 8:16. Last call.
I just wanted to say thank you to Teiko for asking the question and Jyoshin for you answering it. Because maybe it's personal, but it also, I learned something that I really value learning. So I appreciate it when people ask questions like that, because I didn't even think of the question. So thank you.
You're welcome. Please make gesho. The universe is the boundless sky. Just as the lotus is not wetted by the water that surrounds it, the mind is immaculate and beyond the dust. Let us bow to the highest Lord. All Buddhas throughout space and time, all honored ones, Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, wisdom beyond wisdom, Maha Prajna Paramita. Thank you all. And Teiko, I'm more than happy to talk later if you want. We can arrange a time.
Thank you. Thank you for the lovely talk. It made sense out of very difficult.
Thank you.
Reading.
Thank you for the great talk.
All right. Thanks for being here, Ruth Ann.
And thank you for the talk.
And the questions.
And the questions.